shortly here on GB News. Now, 3 migrants, including tragically 2 children, have died while trying to reach the UK in a small boat crossing. Those 2 children were trampled to death, we believe, in a dinghy just off the coast of France. Now, this comes just hours after a woman died in UK waters near Dover, as more than 850 migrants made that perilous crossing in just 24 hours, pushing this year's total to a record-breaking 31,000 plus. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by my next guest, and that's the Independent Chief Inspector, the former Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, John Vine. John, a pleasure to have your esteemed company. Everybody can admit Shabana Mahmood must have one of the toughest jobs in all of politics, if not the entire country. They promise to smash the gangs aren't listening. It simply isn't working. What do you think should be done?
Well, I think what has to be done is that there needs to be a deterrent to prevent the demand, because at the moment, when the government came into power, apart from scrapping the Rwanda scheme, but remember the Rwanda scheme was never actually properly implemented. I mean, it was announced and we talked about it for 2.5 years. You have a situation where the government said, look, we'll just enforce the rules properly. We'll increase the number of returns, we'll deal with asylum applications, and we'll beef up the number of caseworkers. And if we do that properly, then that will provide the deterrent that's needed to put off people coming to the UK. And I think what they've now realised is that won't work. It won't work, I think, because you have to actually show people that if they invest, their life savings in an organised crime group, then it's not going to result in them actually achieving what they want. And unless you actually do that in some way, shape or form, then there's always going to be that demand, as there is in other countries. I mean, we're not unique in having this problem, although we seem to be unique in having it comprising, people jumping into small boats that are completely unsuitable to cross the channel. And that's why people are dying. And that's another reason why the government needs to get a grip of it.
And back in your day, when you were the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, the issue was more stowaways. It was Channel Tunnel. It was coming across on ferries. It wasn't illegal crossings of the channel in boats, which, of course, is very, very visible. Do you think that that's the real problem for the Labour Party? You can see this with your own eyes, and it's such an obvious infringement of sovereignty and civil liberties that really the Labour Party has to do something utterly dramatic. Otherwise, it'd be sunk, as sure as the Tories were.
Well, any government needs to. One of the first priorities of any government in Britain and elsewhere is to secure the country's borders. And I think what people see is that people who are breaching the rules, or there's no fair play in this, and it's always been a problem. When my post was originally created in 2008, with the Borders Act of 2007. Parliament wanted an independent watchdog to tell them what was going on, and it was created because there was a crisis in immigration at that time. There was a massive backlog of asylum cases. There was a real problem with foreign national offenders being released from prisons, remaining in the UK with no attempt by the Home Office, or very little attempt, to deport them to their countries of origin.
But the crisis now dwarfs the crisis then.
Well, the crisis is of the same scale. I mean, so what I'm able to do is to say, basically, it's full circle. I've seen this before, and it's happened again. And yes, I think what's happening now is that because the migrants who are travelling in this way are very visible, and a large part are being rescued by the RNLI and the Home Office cutters, we know how many there are, and we know the scale of the problem. Way back in my time, when the post was created, lots of people were coming into the UK, but we didn't know how many. There was no reliable data on how many people were stowing in lorries, how many were hanging under trains, that sort of thing. And of course, we really had no idea of the scale of it, but we do now.
And how do we stop it? It's a £64 billion question, but it's evaded the Conservatives. It looks to be evading the Labour government, putting politics to one side. If you look around the world, what works? What needs to be done?
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GBNews discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GBnews to start protecting yourself digitally today.
We need a big idea.
Well, one of the ideas, of course, the new government has come up with is the arrangement with France. Now, before we instantly dismiss it, what's happening at the moment isn't working. So we have, for the first time in principle, France agreeing to take people back.
None have gone back so far.
Well, none have gone back so far, and the problem is, of course, like Rwanda, we're talking about it, but it hasn't actually been implemented. So whether it will be implemented now that the French government is in some difficulty, I've no idea. But actually, if it were to be implemented at scale, it might have a deterrent effect. If it's not implemented at scale, and it's only penny numbers, then people who are going to give their money to organised crime are going to say, well, I'll take the risk. I'll take the risk and carry on.
What about offshore containment? What about containment camps? What about immediate deportation? The dramatic ideas mentioned by the likes of Nigel Farage.
Well, I mean, I think Nigel Farage has tried to paint a picture of what he'll do over a 5-year period in government. I don't think what he's announcing is something quick to actually ensure, there's an increasing number of returns or there's an increasing expansion of the immigration detention estate. I mean, there's only limited numbers of spaces in the immigration detention estate, and many of those taken by people who aren't asylum seekers.
Unless you build new things like the Nightingale immigration centres, that's been touted. Might that work?
Well, it might work, but of course, remember, just in the same way that people are complaining about hotels being used in their communities for this purpose, I'm sure there'll be a queue of people who'll be complaining about the building of such facilities near where they live as well.
Okay, John Vine, excellent to have you. Nigel Nelson, let's bring you in. Is the details sketched out here by Mr. Vine indicative of the fact that perhaps this is just too big a problem for anybody to solve?
Well, as I keep saying, I don't think that we are in the short term going to stop the boats. Our best hope is to actually reduce them. What I'm interested in what John is talking about there is the idea of the deterrent, that we don't know if Rwanda would have worked or not worked. I think it wouldn't, and I think it was the numbers were too small. I do have high hopes for the one-in, one-out scheme, but my principal reason for that is that for the first time we are actually accepting asylum seekers without them claiming asylum on British soil or at a British border.
But the problem with that is that almost all of them will get accepted as asylum
they'll be weeded out. The applicants will be weeded out, but actually in France. So the question really, actually for John, is if that was expanded, if we could actually deal with asylum offshore, would that act as the deterrent that you're talking about?
Well, it may, but of course, I think politically the issue is, if people are allowed to be processed abroad without having set foot into the UK, I think there are people in government who would think that would add as an extra incentive to come.
Yeah. It absolutely
But
would.
they wouldn't come over the channel, though, would they? Because if the incentive...
Well, they would need to before being selected.
That's right.
But they wouldn't need to spend the money or take the danger. They'd be thousands and thousands applying by paperwork on the continent.
But again, it's an idea that's not been tried up until now. So perhaps it should be tried.
But you're creating a safe route that you don't have now.
And of course, if I was from an asylum and refugee organisation, I'd be talking about safe routes, and saying, well, this, if we had safer routes, this would prevent the sort of tragedy.
But that won't please the electorate.
No.
The electorate don't want to know about safe routes. They want to know about firm action.
Yes. And, of course, the other factor is it brings into the question of how many then? How many would you allow in by such a method? And if that quota, because other countries in the world have quotas, Australia has had a quota system for years. But once that's full, where do people who then... who are unsuccessful, where do they go? They'll go back, potentially, to organised crime.
Fascinating stuff. Great to have you in for the first time. Please come back. John Vine, excellent guest. Thank you so much.